so the room is empty. Okay, I know the food was a bit heavy. Okay, as Dr. Amanda said, I'm Thabelo, Netshivhungululu, right? From Modena. I'm the technical manager there. I've been talking BIM and stuff since like 2010, 2011, right? And I literally have 20 minutes to go through this. I'll try not to rush, right? But the idea here is just to show you how ISO 19650 applies practically on a project. Okay, are we good? We together? Awesome, cool. First thing, a lot of projects in these days start off with an exchange information requirement, BIM execution plan. You'll have a CDE with a folder structure, right? But how many of you still find yourselves approving or giving a go-ahead on an email or a WhatsApp? Warwick, right? That still happens because hopefully in this presentation, I will share the missing parts and what works and what doesn't work. We're good, right? Right, so what typically happens on a project, if you look at the column on the left, that paperwork is typically created within a week, right? You'll receive an EIR or an exchange information requirement with your appointment, right? The team will put together a BIM execution plan, sign it, right? You'll get invited to a CDE, a common data environment. You'll find a nice folder structure, get enforced, told on how you should name your documentation as well, and you're ready to go. But what we find in projects most of the time is we can't audit what's actually happening on that project, okay? We have approvals happening by email, WhatsApp, Slack, right? Uploads without reviews, right? People are under pressure and just uploading documentation. You find we get duplicate information in a project. I actually found a project, a live project currently. They issued a BIM execution plan in the common data environment, right? But it was shared using the design collaboration platform. So everyone had to go in and consume this document. So we found tasked teams working on a version 1 or reading a version 2 BEP, but in the main area, there's like a version 10 BIM execution plan. So it's just duplicates, still working in a common data environment, but it's not managed correctly, right? And then finally, I think a lot of projects have this. There's no proof of who authorized the actual information that's in the common data environment, right? So what we found, ISO 19650's failure is usually not software failure. It's not the platform, it's not your Revit models, it is a governance and an enforcement failure, right? So I'll talk a little bit on that, right? And we typically need to see project information as decision systems, right? And I'll take you through a little workflow on what information goes through the different stages, and then a piece of information will go through in a project. Initially, you should know what's required from you in that project, right? Once you know what's required from you in the project, you'd obviously have to produce the information. You can use whatever tool you want to use to produce that information. Ideally, after producing the information, there should be a review workflow, right? A review stage where the information gets reviewed, right? Once it's reviewed, you need to have decided on how you exchange that information in your project, right? Once you've shared the information needs to get approved, right? Ready to make a decision, and then obviously you go out for your outcome, okay? And if your piece of information doesn't go along this workflow, we find that there's definitely gonna be a break or a bad decision made in the project. So what does ISO 19650 actually answer, right? And I'm avoiding terminologies intentionally here so we understand what it actually is, right? Initially at project stage, when you conceptualize a project, ISO 19650 will answer what is required from you in that project, right? I'll show you the documents in a moment, right? Why is that information needed, okay? Who must produce it? When is it due? Who will check it, right? How does it get verified? How it gets exchanged, approved, and what status is that information in? Make sense? Are we still together? Cool. Right, I didn't start my timer, eh? Cool. So the workflow starts before anyone opens Revit, right? And initially, and this doesn't happen, we find you get invited into a project that has a BIM delivery required, and everyone jumps directly to a BIM execution plan. My opinion, if there's a BIM execution plan and the information before that is not done, that BIM execution plan document is useless, right? Because what are you delivering, right? And what should actually happen in a digital delivery project, we should receive from the business or from the client an organization information requirement, why the business needs that information, right? The business or the client will put together an asset and a project information requirement document. We are way before appointment, right? So the client should know exactly, this is what I want to build, this is why I need it, and that I'll be operating this building, for example, for 25 years. And I'll be maintaining this assets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're still together, right? And from there, you then, at appointment, you receive an exchange information requirement. The document will tell you how we expect you to deliver that information. And then from there, you as a delivery team will put together, in response, an implementation plan, responding to how you'll be producing this information in a project, right? The way that looks as well, we would ask you typically to give us an information delivery plan. It's a list, people are calling it a drawing register, right? But you plan ahead on what information you'll be delivering, at what level of information needed, and when and how you'll be delivering. The TIDP, Task Information Delivery Plan, gets taken into a Master Information Delivery Plan. I'll expand on it a little bit. Right, so a lot of vague asks happen currently in a project where people say, for our mechanical model, we need everything at LOD 400. Popular one is LOD 500, right? That doesn't tell you anything as a task team, right? You want me to model this projector, for example, at its highest detail, but how are you going to use it? What information do you need with that? The correct way to probably approach a project is by, I'll say to you, please provide me coordinated equipment data, installation zones, maintainable asset identifiers, and approved access requirements before construction release. Right? So if I come to you and I say, I need this type of information at this level, et cetera, because I want to be able to maintain it for the next 25 years, right? So what makes this look good, every good requirement names the decision, right? It names the user, the date, the format, and the level of information needed, and the acceptance test, right? I'm gonna rely on you on time, eh? Cool? Right, that's a fun part. We've created the information, we've got the requirements. Another missing part in information delivery or digital delivery, we typically don't have people who own those processes or own the information, right? In ISO 19650, we talk about an appointing party. Appointing party is a client, right? They set the requirement. They will appoint a lead appointed party. We typically call them a principal agent in South Africa, and they'll coordinate the delivery team, consultants, right? The appointed parties, the consultants in a project, will produce the information, and in those businesses, task teams will actually do the work, right? I'll just skip a little bit, right? And once again, if you don't have ownership of information, or you don't have the requirements, you must have people that own that information that's required, and then once you're done with that, you're ready to move on to a common data environment, right? Now, we typically talk of a common data environment as a folder structure. I've seen a lot of projects, two examples. I've seen a project, you go and jump onto ACC, there's a work in progress folder, shared, published, archive, right? In the industry currently, people don't see that, they freak out. You can actually run ACC with no folders, right? And use status codes, et cetera, because the platform is already set up for ISO 19650, right? So for a common data environment to work, right, your task team, the people that are doing the work, the day-to-day guys, must have a work in progress space, right? You then have to, once they work, there's a gate that's very specific. Once the information is reviewed, it gets moved over into a shared environment, right? And this shared environment is not shared for approved or for construction. This is where you share information with the rest of the team for collaboration and coordination. Once that's done, it goes through another process when it gets reviewed and approved. Once approved, it gets copied over to a published environment. It doesn't need to get called published. It could be for construction, for tender, issued for information, but that information needs to be approved, and you need to have a track record of who has approved that information, and that information is what you use to get your outcome, right? Platforms like ACC, once again, will auto-archive your previous versions. You guys know about version controlling. You don't have to create another archive folder to supersede your information. The platform already does that to you, right? In your projects, quickly, where does approval happen on your projects? In the CDE, by email, okay, in the CDE? Let's go Stefaniti stocks. Right, by email. Don't be shy, guys, it happens. Right? WhatsApp or verbally. We still get that as well, right? To make sure that we're all speaking the same language, we talk about a naming convention, which is very important, that metadata must communicate a meaning, right? I've had guys say, no, we name documents a certain way in our office because when my director goes to site, he must find the drawing. Unfortunately, if you're delivering a project digitally, we don't actually care about your director, right? The project must find that information, right? So teams should agree on your naming convention. I think you guys know this, right? And basically, a correctly named container can still be wrong, right? It doesn't mean your information is complete or it's authorized, but the metadata must point to a workflow evidence, right? So I don't know if you guys can see the status codes. ISO 19650 has a long list of status codes that apply to different stages of your project. How am I doing? God damn, okay. Right, I spoke about the MIDP, right? And just to show you how that fits in, I'll talk very briefly on this. Task teams must tell the BIM lead on a project what they'll be producing. That MIDP, the Master Information Delivery Plan, would need to align with the program for the project as well. It's not just a random Excel sheet that we reference as a drawing register, right? So we use it to keep track of information getting delivered back to the project, right? There's a workflows, I'll skip that. So why does it typically fail? Right? There's 3 reasons why ISO 9650 fails. Apologies about that little E, it was late at night. So it's governance gaps, right? Unrestricted access for everyone, compliance measured by documents produced, project teams, someone mentioned it earlier, never trained as well. Another thing as well, it's a requirement gap that we typically get on projects. Templates get copied from another project. You grab an asset information requirement document from project A, and you want to produce it for project D, right? And enforcement gaps as well. Approvals are made outside the CDE, right? I like that little statement there. Complexity is not maturity, right? You need to understand what you're doing and how you're distributing this information. We find projects that are extremely complex, and the moment I see that, I know that the person doesn't know what they're talking about or what they're doing, right? Okay. In closing, I made it. We need to make the workflow real, right? We need to make sure that you trust the information, right? That's the only reason we emphasize ISO 19650. You want to know as a contractor or a project manager or a facility manager when you receive information that this is trusted information. And the only way you can have trusted information is to check whether your requirements define actual decisions, confirm who produced that information, and basically configure your CDE to support your workflow and measure whether it reduces uncertainty, delay, and rework. So in closing, ISO 19650 is not about producing compliant documentation. It is about producing trusted information through controlled, repeatable, and accountable workflows. Thank you.